Welcome to accommodate this. I know this is off schedule. For my videos, I usually try to release one a week on Wednesdays, but this just couldn't wait. It's not going to follow the same formal format as my other videos, but I just have to get this out there. So on April 16th, 2025, uh, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., the Health Secretary for the United States, gave a press conference and announced his plans for autism research. Now, his speech was full of lies and falsehoods that are based on conspiracy theories and outdated information. Although he admitted he would follow the evidence when one of the reporters asked, he's already plotted a path to his own ends. Make no mistake, this is a formulated effort to devalue and delegitimize the valid science that he does not like so that he can insert his own narrative. You see, the thing about science is our knowledge and understanding continues to grow. We don't just doggedly stick to old ideas because we like them. Science is about being proven wrong. We give our best explanations and do everything we can to disprove them. And when a concept has been proven wrong, we adjust our understanding and our models accordingly, so we're always working off of the best information that we have. What RFK Jr. is doing is cherry-picking studies and research that supports his false narrative, disregarding any research and findings that he doesn't like, which is dishonest and self-serving. What he's doing is damaging because it emboldens actors with dangerous agendas to justify the havoc that they plan to wreak. So let's talk about some of the things he had to say in his speech. He started off by calling autism a disease, conflating it with diabetes and infectious diseases. But we know autism is not a disease. I cover this in great detail on my video on categorizing autism, which you can see here. I'll put a link to it in the description below as well. After falsely labeling autism as a disease, he began referring to various studies to inflate the number of instances, a dramatic effort to make the situation seem more dire than it is. He uses statistics from a study in California, which found nearly twice as many instances of autism, and then generalizes it by saying that's probably a nationwide trend. This is a total speculation and dishonest. He shares some frightening numbers next, comparing autistic counts from the 1980s to counts from today, trying to pass them off as the spreading of a disease rather than a reflection of changes in our science. Then he falsely claimed most cases of autism are severe. However, there's no such thing as severe or mild autism. There's autism, and then there's a level of support needs. You either have autism or you don't, and support needs can vary throughout a person's lifetime. What people often think of as severe autism is actually autism with a co-occurring intellectual disability. And only about 1/3 of autistics also have an intellectual disability, which means the majority of us would not fit RFK Jr.'s definition of severe. He went on to describe his idea of severe autism, saying most of us are nonverbal, non-toilet trained, head banging, non-tactile, stimming, and toe walking people. It's true that many of us do not speak, and when we are under great amounts of stress, we may lose our ability to speak. But the majority of us do speak, and all of us have unique ways of communicating. Stimming and toe walking are not harmful in and of themselves. And while we may not have good coordination in some ways, we may be very talented and capable in others. Toilet training and head banging are often associated with autistic children, but they eventually learn to use the toilet and to have stims that are less harmful. So those are just temporary behaviors and not reflective of every autistic person. RFK Jr. then makes an effort to label autism as an epidemic and to delegitimize science by naming it as epidemic denial. He admits he wants to get away from the idea that increased prevalence is due to better diagnostics, and claims there are people who don't want us to look at environmental factors. This is a straw man fallacy, where he attempts to weaken the other side of the argument and then claims that weakness makes his argument stronger. It's the intellectual equivalent of trimming the bushes so your deck looks bigger. It is a tool of conspiracy theorists and liars. It is dishonest and devoid of critical thought. He uses old data, which he admitted was old, to sell us the idea that those older studies established a baseline in the 60s and 80s, and there are thousands more today. He says deniers would have to believe researchers missed 98.8% of autistic children, that they were somehow invisible to doctors, teachers, parents, and therapists, and researchers. And then he claims they went back and only found they had missed one child. Let's break this down. First, he wants us to trust the baseline of 4 in every 10,000 children being autistic. The studies he cited were in Wisconsin, Minnesota, and North Dakota. Again, he takes those few studies and generalizes them to apply those numbers everywhere else. And then he accuses any new research as being false if it came after those studies, and they show that our understanding of the condition has improved. He ignores the fact that the diagnostic criteria has changed since then. It was based on the DSM-3, and now we are on the DSM-5. He ignores the fact that Asperger syndrome was considered a separate condition for half of that time. He ignores the fact that the government invested billions of dollars to understand the condition and to educate thousands of people to become experts in identifying and diagnosing the condition, because he doesn't think that's good enough. And he ignores the fact that underserved communities are now getting access to diagnosis. He ignores the fact that many people diagnosed today were children back then, but they didn't have the access to a diagnosis like we have today. But he ends his argument with the lie that only one child was missing from those old statistics. That's a lie so ridiculous it would be funny if it weren't so stupidly dangerous. He goes on to cite a study at UC Davis in California in 2009 by a doctor whose name he struggled to pronounce. I couldn't find anyone with that name, though I admit I couldn't really understand what the name was as it came out of his mouth. He says the study was about answering the question about whether autism is genetic or caused by environmental factors. Without describing the research involved, he claimed genetics are a dead-end issue, and that we've known it's environmental from a toxin. We just have to identify that toxin and eliminate it. Not only is this a statistical lie, it is the kind of lie snake oil salesmen used in the 19th century. It's the kind of lie that oversimplifies the issue, making it sound as though there's only one element contributing to all of this. It's dismissive of the complicated nature of the condition and the spectrum of ways that it manifests. He went on to state the cost of autism treatment would cost $1 trillion per year in the near future, and that autism destroys families. He never detailed how it destroys families other than describing a list of undesirable, stereotypical behaviors of autistics. I guess when someone decides to have a family, It's devastating to not get the family that they wanted. It's horrible to not have an ideal family. Having a child with special needs is so detrimental to families that it destroys them. The problem is not autism. It's the bigoted, egotistical people who feel burdened by their autistic family members. The problem is the attitudes of non-autistics being too self-absorbed and embarrassed to be related to an autistic person. The problem is how those attitudes lead to abuse and mistreatment of the autistic person, who carries the brunt of the family's resentment, all because of their audacity to be born different, to be born in a little monster of need. Oh, but that can't be it, because then when he claims that many autistic children are born normal and behave normally, but then regress into autism, suggesting that had to be caused by an environmental factor. Well, we know when brain development occurs, and we know that it is based mostly on genetics. And we also know environmental factors such as a supportive and loving household can make all the difference. And we know that trauma and abuse can have damaging, long-lasting effects on a person's developing brain. We know that trauma and abuse can have regressive powers, causing them to retreat into themselves to protect themselves. Yes, there are environmental factors, and many of those factors are the people surrounding the autistic person, even those in their own families. RFK Jr. ended his speech by claiming autistic people won't pay taxes, won't hold a job, play baseball, write a poem, go on a date, or use a toilet unassisted. Again, all lies that can be easily debunked with a Google search of famous autistic people. Then he said, "We're doing this to our children and we need to put an end to it." I would agree that people like him are likely hurting their children, and that needs to stop. But what exactly is he suggesting? Autism is a difference in how brains develop, which most often results in overdevelopment. So is he suggesting that we stifle brain development? Make everyone as stupid as he is? That we stop brain development? It's statements like this that truly show he has no clue what he is talking about. And that leads us to the next part of the press conference, words from Walter Rodney, a lead researcher from the ADAM project. ADDM, or ADAM, stands for Autism and Developmental Disabilities Monitoring. The project was basically established to get more accurate counts of the prevalence of autism and other developmental disabilities across the nation. But their focus was mostly in only 10 states. They combined the data with 5 other sites established by the Centers for Autism and Developmental Disabilities Research and Epidemiology, or CADDRE, and the stats from the CDC in Georgia. But I couldn't find any information about this Walter Rodney, who was not even cited in any of the documentation papers that I found for the ADDM project. Walter Rodney claimed that autism changes families, communities, and societies wherever it is found. Of course, he didn't explain in what ways they changed. They could have been positive changes. He claims that better diagnostic tools alone could not account for the 300% increase in autism prevalence over the last 20 years. And that's true. There are many factors contributing to that increase, including changes in diagnostic criteria that expanded autism to cast a wider net, applying to a larger demographic. There's also the combining of the diagnosis with Asperger's and more widespread access to diagnostic services. Nobody is saying the increase is solely due to better training except those on his side. Walter Rodney continued by stating autism deserves to be treated as an urgent public phenomenon and a health crisis. He's done nothing to support that claim other than talk about how prevalent it is and how much they don't understand. He, RFK Jr., and Trump are using lies to scare us into believing it's a horrible disease, despite all the evidence suggesting otherwise. He asserts it must be triggered by environmental factors, and yet he's going to start a study to determine that, which isn't how science works. You don't come up with a conclusion and then look for evidence to back it up. That's confirmation bias. That isn't following the evidence. And although Walter Rodney was supposedly a lead researcher, he claims that we have not learned how to treat or prevent autism over the last 20 years. And yet he and RFK Jr. are still able to estimate that treatment will supposedly cost $1 trillion. He says we can't just provide services without understanding root causes. I would disagree. Supports are still needed, whether we know what causes them or not. Efforts may be more effective if we knew root causes, but he's using this to smuggle in the idea that there's a single cause. Autism was more complex than that. RFK Jr. cut in and said he's read books about this, and it only takes common sense to see autism is an epidemic. If that were the case, that it really only took common sense, then research would not be needed. It would be obvious to all of us. Yet that isn't the case because it is not that simple. He goes on to show us the kind of common sense he's talking about. He says autism is only happening in children and that he doesn't see autism in anyone his age. Then he says it's lifelong. Yes, it is lifelong, which means it's not only present in children. So he negates his own point. And the fact that he doesn't see autism in anyone his age is irrelevant. Has he been looking? Does he know that he is 71 and the average life expectancy for autism is 54? If he's only been looking for those with what he calls extreme autism, well, no wonder he hasn't found them. It doesn't exist. And most of us learn to mask our autistic traits so we don't draw unwanted attention to ourselves. That's why it's considered a hidden condition. And he asks why autism is so pervasive and then jumps to the conclusion that it has to be due to an environmental toxin and that someone has put it into our air, food, water, etc. If this is his idea of common sense, we are doomed. It's just speculation based on his very limited view. Then, by means of projection, he claims the press has not been skeptical enough. And yet he is the one relying on outdated information, claiming genetic research is a dead end despite all the progress that's been made. He says they're beginning a study on environmental toxins and asserts that only 10 to 25% of new cases could be attributed to better conditions and better diagnostics. But that leaves 75 to 80% of cases that are environmental. These statistics are made up. Birth is the biggest contributing factor. That's why genetics is so critical. It's already been proven genetics play a major role, not a supporting role. Not only is he relying on unfounded speculation, he's approaching the research backwards. What he's doing is dishonest and will hurt a lot of real people. In another display of their superior common sense, Walter chimes in by saying there's a better recognition and awareness because there are more autistic children for them to diagnose. He thinks our understanding of autism is better because there are more autistic children to study. And by studying them more, our understanding gets better. Yeah, that's how it works. But he's stating it as to suggest that our understanding has not improved our ability to identify autism, that these autistic children just appeared out of nowhere. They couldn't possibly have existed all this time unnoticed. They couldn't possibly be autistic until we've diagnosed them. The stupidity is deafening. As if the shit show couldn't get any worse, RFK Jr. jumped back in to say, "We have really good genetic markers, but they're not going to dictate your destiny. You need an environmental factor." Then he used the example of 1 in 5 people dying from cigarettes. He said that one person had some genetic factor, but that we needed an environmental toxin. For what? To explain how the other 4 survived? Isn't introducing toxic smoke into your lungs the environmental factor? Was he saying that 1 death out of 5 was not destined by the dictates of his genetics not being as resilient as the other 4? He went on to list several catalysts he plans to investigate, such as mold, food additives, pesticides, air, water, medicine, and ultrasound. And he explained that the EPA said the autism epidemic started in 1989. So he's going to look at different environmental factors that happened during that time period. And he's going to use AI and the massive available records to find answers faster than they ever could before. In the end, he says the research will be done by the most credible scientists around the world and faster than ever. Yet, he plans to enlist those scientists by issuing a grant and having the research community bid on research contracts. This sounds less like offering a job to the most qualified and credible scientists, and more like offering it to the slimiest agents who will do the work faster and cheaper than anyone else. Does that seem problematic to anyone else besides me? Then he says market pressure will be put on industries creating these toxins that he's so convinced exists before he started the research. And that's the entire plan right there. He plans to turn this charade into a money-making scheme for the government. He plans to villainize the autistic community, exploit our vulnerability and the ignorance of the public, to weaponize the government against companies that he wants to penalize for crimes only his studies and his research can confirm exist. He wants to control the intelligence for this effort, control the data, and control the narrative so he can siphon more money into the government. This is not good. This is deceptive and dangerous. And I hope you're all watching and taking this in.